friends! Today's story is White Mice. Granny should never have entrusted my Uncle Cain with the job of taking me to the station and putting me on the train for Delhi. He got me to the station all right, but then proceeded to put me on the wrong train. I was 9 or 10 at the time, and I had been spending part of my winter holidays with my grandparents in Dehra. Now it was time to go back to my parents in Delhi before joining school again. Just make sure that Ruskin gets into the right compartment, said Granny to her only son Kenneth, then 30 unmarried and employed. And make sure he has a berth to himself and a thermos of drinking water. Uncle Cain carried out the instructions. He even bought me a bar of chocolate, consuming most of it himself while telling me how to pass my exams without too much study. I will tell you the secret someday. The train pulled out of the station and we waved fond goodbyes to each other. An hour and 2 small stations later, I discovered to my horror that I was not on the train to Delhi, but on the night express to Lucknow, over 300 miles in the opposite direction. Someone in the compartment suggested that I get down at the next station. Another said it would not be wise for a small boy to get off the train at a strange place in the middle of the night. Wait till we get to Lucknow, advised another passenger. Then send a telegram to your parents. Early next morning, the train steamed into Lucknow. One of the passengers kindly took me to the stationmaster's office. Mr. P.K. Ghosh, stationmaster, said the sign over his door. When my predicament had been explained to him, Mr. Ghosh looked down at me through his bifocals and said, Yes, we must send a telegram to your parents. I don't have their address as yet, I said. They were to meet me in Delhi. You would better send a telegram to my grandfather in Dehra. Done, said Mr. Ghosh, who was in the habit of repeating certain words. And meanwhile, I will take you home and introduce you to my family. Mr. Ghosh's house was just behind the station. He had his cook bring me a cup of sweet milky tea and 2 large rasgullas, syrupy Indian sweetmeats. You like rasgullas, I hope. Oh yes, sir, I said. Thank you very much. Now let me show you my family. And he took me by the hand and led me to a boarded up veranda at the back of the house. Here I was amazed to find a miniature railway, complete with a station, railway bungalows, signal boxes, and next to it a miniature fairground complete with swings roundabout and a Ferris wheel. Cavorting on the roundabout and Ferris wheel were some 15 to 20 white mice. Another dozen or so ran in out of the tunnels and climbed up a toy train. Mr. Ghosh pressed a button and the little train crowded with white mice left the station and went rattling off to the far corner of the veranda. My hobby for many years, said Mr. Ghosh. What do you think of it? I like the train, sir, but not the mice. There are an awful lot of them, sir. They must consume great many rasgullas. No, I don't give them rasgullas, snapped Mr. Ghosh, a little annoyed. Just railway biscuits broken up. These old station biscuits are just the thing for them. Some of our biscuits haven't been touched for years. Too hard for our teeth. Rasgullas are for you and me. Now I will leave you here while I return to office and send a telegram to your grandfather. These newfangled telephones never work properly. Grandfather arrived that evening, and in the meantime, I helped feed the white mice with the railway biscuits, then watched Mr. Ghosh operate the toy train. Some of the mice took the train, some played on the swings and roundabouts, while some climbed in out of Mr. Ghosh's pockets and ran up and down his uniform. By the time grandfather arrived, I had consumed about a dozen rasgullas and fallen asleep in a huge railway armchair by Mr. Ghosh's living room. I woke up to find the stationmaster busy showing grandfather his little railway colony of white mice. Grandfather, being a retired railwayman, was more interested in the toy train. But he said polite things about that mice, commending their pink eyes and pretty little feet. Mr. Ghosh beamed with pleasure and sent out for more rasgullas. When grandfather and I had settled into the compartment and the correct train late that night, Mr. Ghosh came to the window to say goodbye. As the train began moving, he thrust a cardboard box into my hands and said, "A present for you and your grandfather." More rasgullas, I thought. But when the train was moving and I had lifted the lid of the box, I found 2 white mice asleep on a bed of cotton wool. Back in Dehra, I kept the white mice in their box. I had plans for them. Uncle Cain had spent most of the day sulking in the guava orchard, too embarrassed to face me. Granny had given him a good lecture on how to be a responsible adult, but I was thirsty for revenge. After dinner, I slipped into my uncle's room and released the mice under his bedsheet. After an hour later, we all had to leap out of the beds when Uncle Cain dashed out of his room, screaming that something soft and furry was running about inside his pajamas. "Well, off with the pajamas," said grandfather, giving me a wink. He had a good idea of what had happened. After Uncle Cain had done the tap dance, one white mouse finally emerged from the pajamas, but the other had run up the sleeve of the pajama coat and suddenly popped out beneath my uncle's chin. Uncle Cain grew hysterical. Convinced that his room was full of mice, pink, white and brown, he locked himself into the storeroom and slept on an old sofa. Next day, grandfather took me to the station and put me on the train to Delhi. It was the right train this time. "I will look after the white mice," he said. Grandfather grew quite fond of mice and even wrote to Mr. Ghosh asking if he could spare another pair. But Mr. Ghosh, he learnt later, had been transferred to another part of the country and had taken his family with him.